Another early start this morning sees me once again take the Hello Kitty Haruka, which has quickly become our favourite train in Osaka, to Kyoto. As we're not staying far from Tennoji Station, the Haruka is very convenient for quickly getting around the loop line to Osaka's main station, Shin Osaka, or all the way to Kyoto as an express service. About 50 minutes later I arrived at Kyoto and got to see its very impressive main building. This is only the second largest station building in Japan, which makes it a little disappointing we did not have time to fully appreciate the largest, which is Nagoya. For a city famous for being very old, the station is anything but, with a very modern roof over the vast concourse, stretching for several stories, and the west end features what appears to be a stairway to heaven. Allegedly it does have an end, but I wasn't going to go all the way up there to prove it. The main reason why I didn't climb Mount Kyoto Station was because I was actually here to travel one stop down the line to the former Nijo Station, which nowadays is home to the excellent Kyoto Rail Museum. See, I was just getting really warmed up with the railway talk because apparently I took 40 minutes of video during my 3-hour rapid tour of the museum. So here goes that much abbreviated tour. The Kyoto Rail Museum is run by JR West, so most of the displays feature either JNR or JR West locomotives and rolling stock, going all the way back from the first steam engines built in Japan to the 500 series Shinkansen, which still runs on the Sanyo Shinkansen. The museum is built around the former Umekoji Roundhouse, which is still next to the Tokaido main line into Kyoto Station, the still active Umeoki Freight Yard, and the Sanin main line, which is mainly used to ferry tourists to the sites on the north side of Kyoto. The roundhouse, which has a very impressive display of steam engines, is the oldest concrete roundhouse still standing in Japan. And the steam engines are not just for show, as a fair number of them are still kept in operating condition and are regularly steamed up and take passengers along the short museum line that runs alongside the nearby Umekoji Park. Just being able to say that I travelled behind a C56 steam engine in Japan was well worth the 300 yen ticket to do so. Adjacent to the roundhouse is the workshop, where you can see the museum maintaining their running fleet and restoring their future exhibits. And around the main building, the electric and diesel trains are displayed. Now for me, one of the highlights was the Zero Series Shinkansen, one of the most iconic and recognisable trains in the world, even to people who know nothing about railways. This is what they think of when they think bullet train. There is actually only one displayed outside Japan, which I've been fortunate to visit, but the museum here has 2 power cars and several coaches from a set which are open, so you can actually walk around them and see how passengers travelled on the original high-speed train. And if you want to be more than a passenger, the cab is also open and you are very much encouraged to sit in the driver's seat in what was one of the most advanced trains in the world to this day. It is quite contrast to the driver's seat of a steam loco, which back in 1964 were still reasonably common in Japan, if not very common in some parts. Aside from the trains themselves, I think the museum does a fantastic job showing the whole operation of the railway and its history, as well as just the basics of how trains work, what signals mean, how tracks are maintained, in a way that someone who knew nothing about railways could leave with a working knowledge of railway operations and technology. I've been to a few railway museums, and this is one of the best. If not nearly the best I visited. The National Rail Museum in York kind of has it on scale, but in terms of content and presentation, they're pretty even. And there are other railway museums in Japan run by other railway companies, as there are many railways companies in Japan, and I will need to visit them on a future trip, but the bar has been set very high by the Kyoto Rail Museum. And it is very fitting that there are quality museums in Japan dedicated to rails, because if it's not been apparent by our trip so far, Japan runs on rails. Yes, we've obviously been in the cities, but so much of Japan is dense cities, crisscrossed by many railway lines, as is the whole country. Jimsf, who could previously count on one hand the number of trains he's been on in his life, commented how cool it was that in Japan you can truly just walk up to your local station, which will never be more than a 10-minute walk away in nearly every town in the country, and get to nearly anywhere in Japan. Now, it's not a perfect system, anyone who's saying otherwise has probably never actually been here, but it is one of the closest experiences you will get to a perfect system, and the Kyoto Rail Museum absolutely does this indispensable aspect of Japanese life justice. And spoilers for the rest of this video, this is easily the best thing to do in Kyoto. The next closest thing was also railway related, and nothing else we saw in Kyoto was close, but we're probably going to get into that more later, as now it was time to head back to Osaka. Pick up Jimsf and head out to the western suburbs of Osaka for a bit of exploring. We've seen them on the 79s, but it wasn't the last 79s. I'm pretty sure. We haven't seen those wafer things. That sun now, haven't seen a lot of that. Just makes another appearance, a rare appearance it seems, for those. But the old favourites are still kicking around, which is nice to know. Oh, train. At least I find the actual train we're supposed to be on. The main reason why we came here will be covered in the main channel video that I really hope is uploaded at this point, but afterwards we did find ourselves wandering around Nishinomiya, a city between Osaka and Kobe, where we found probably the best blossoms of the trip, closely matched with tomorrow's destination, but on this Sunday afternoon, with people sitting out along the river under the sakura. It may seem modest, there was no great castle or palace or great scenic vista in the background. It was just ordinary buildings, a road, a railway, a stream. But to be honest, it seemed like paradise to me, and this really did feel like actual Japan. Not an Instagram story or a status update, just a normal spring day in this part of the world. Kobe itself gave a similar feel of just normal, everyday Japan. We found the famous Chinatown that smelled delicious, at least to me. My companion was not as impressed, so dinner was some Japanese pasta, which neither of us complained about at all, so absolutely can recommend Japan's interpretation of Italian food. Kobe was a bit of an impromptu visit, so there was no plan, and after dinner we just wandered towards the port where we found a big fish, and then a more somber mood found the memorial to the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake in 1995, one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded in Japan and the deadliest since the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, killing 6,434 people, most of them here in Kobe. For a sense of the destruction done by the earthquake, part of the pier has been left as it was in the aftermath of the tremors. Despite the damage, the recovery was remarkably quick, with the city determined to have been rebuilt within 2 years. And as part of that rebuilding, this area of the port was turned into a modern park, which really looked great lit up and was a nice way to wrap up our unpleasant visit of Kobe. The next day we travelled further afield to the historic city of Himeji, but we started the day with a strong 17 ice update. So we've seen this one because we've gone past it a few times, but we've never commented on this 17 ice. This is 17 ice on platform 20 in Osaka. Nothing new. I think this... We've seen that maybe once before. It's a rare appearance, a welcome appearance. Also the chocolate mint is also pretty rare. Yeah. The wafer one seems to be more popular in Kansai, consistently seeing the wafers. The old favourites are still at the top and doing strong, so nothing dramatic to report, but I do think this is yet another combination of 17 ice.
Yeah. Anything with a different combo.
Yeah. Which is nice and convenient to get your train. Other than ice cream, we were here for a very specific train. In addition to the Haruka, JR West also uses Hello Kitty branding on a 500 series Shinkansen, which makes a single round trip a day from Hakata to Shin Osaka. While it is possible that some passengers were here who just wanted the 1137 to Hakata, it is also clear that the majority were either here just for this train or had adjusted their daily plans to line up with its schedule, which is what we did. The branding here is even more extensive than on the Harukas, and the front coach is an exhibition/gift shop area, because of course it needs a gift shop. Coincidentally, the Sanyo Shinkansen opened the same year as Hello Kitty's first appearance in 1975, which may have had something to do with the original tie-up. I think it's a genius way to get tourists to travel west of Osaka, and I'm all for encouraging this. Our time on the Kauai train was relatively short, as 40 minutes later we were at Himeji to see the UNESCO recognised castle. Conveniently, the castle was at the end of a long street leading from the station, so navigating our way was straightforward. Known as the White Heron for reasons that should be obvious, Himeji Castle is the largest and most visited castle in Japan and is one of the finest examples of Japanese castles. It sits atop a hill surrounded by what were originally the defensive moats and walls, but are now parks, gardens and Himeji Zoo. The first castle was built on the site in 1333, but it was significantly remodeled by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who also built Osaka Castle. The castle passed down several feudal lords until the end of the feudal system, when even the Japanese army abandoned the castle and it was sold for a mere 23 yen. However, the new owner couldn't afford to demolish the castle. A bomb that landed on the top floor in 1945 failed to explode, and even the Great Hanshin earthquake couldn't even knock over the bottles of sake in the tower's shrine. It does seem that some sort of divine intervention has kept this castle standing, and it was registered as one of Japan's first UNESCO World Heritage Sites in 1993. As a typical Japanese castle, the towering keep is primarily used for storage during peacetime, as the lord's residence and government offices were in the smaller outbuildings, so the tower now seems a bit empty. In times of war, the people would move into the tower and use it for defense, which may be surprising for us Europeans that you would use a wooden tower for this purpose, but don't underestimate the huge stone foundations that the wooden tower sits on. Being a completely wooden tower though, visitors have to remove their shoes when inside the tower. The tour route incorporates the courtyards and the gardens immediately surrounding the tower, and we got a combined ticket that gives entry to the neighbouring Kokoen Gardens, which are beautiful even on a rainy and grey day. Given how iconic and photogenic the entire castle park is, it is incredible to think that it is more luck than judgment that stopped this wonderful place becoming a shopping street or a factory. And also to think that we nearly didn't visit, other than that we needed an excuse to travel on a very pink train. The next day was our last day in Kansai, so we did something really controversial. We skipped most of Kyoto. Unfortunately, my visit 2 days ago to visit the Railway Museum confirmed our fears that Kyoto's recent reputation of being an overcrowded tourist nightmare was correct. The Sanin Main Line, which connects Kyoto Station to two of the most popular tourist sites in Nijo Castle and Arashiyama, is an overcrowded disaster because JR West insists on having the limited express trains be fully reserved, which sends all the tourists, most of which probably have a JR passes that would otherwise let them use that express train, onto the local trains, which these trains cannot hold everyone and it becomes just a mess. And this is unfortunately the pattern that's repeated throughout the city at the tourist hotspots. So we skipped most of them. So this video we will not be showing you the old Kyoto streets filled with tourists and locals that hate them, or we won't be visiting the big shrines. This is not a video on how to actually spend a day in Kyoto, as our advice would be don't. Just go somewhere else. Himeji is much nicer. Well, actually pretty much everywhere else we went on this trip was much nicer. Just go there. Go anywhere else. So all we did was we picked out two places we did actually want to see in Kyoto, and thankfully these places were not that busy, as for some reason tourists don't appreciate the old Imperial Palace. The thing that gave Kyoto its historic significance in the first place. Yeah, apparently no one actually goes there. So we went to the Imperial Palace on one of Kyoto's only two subway lines, which is part of the issue with the tourism, is they only have two subway lines. Madness in Japan. And yes, as it turned out, the palace itself was closed, which was really inconvenient. But the rest of the gardens and little shrines dotted around them are quite neat. As it seems, there's a lot of shrines here dedicated to various aspects of Japanese life. There was one for music, and there was three to the sea, because the sea is very important in Japan. Outside the park, we then got the reality check of what Kyoto is really like, because apart from some carefully selected and very much photographed sites, it's just a normal city, and to be honest, nearly everywhere else in Kansai is nicer than it. Even the suburbs of Nishinomiya or Chiba, where no foreigners visit, are nicer. And Takayama, where we're going to go tomorrow, is just as good as Kyoto's best, and gets a tiny fraction of the visitors in comparison. Anyway, time to stop complaining, as you've kind of heard my piece on Kyoto, and go somewhere that is genuinely good. Because while the tourists will kill each other for a view of the Katsura River Gorge at Arashiyama, we had a cunning plan. Instead of going into the park where you could get one view of the scenic valley, why not just take a train through the valley, on reserve seats, and see all of the gorge. And well, that's what the Sagano Scenic Railway does. Running from Saga Arashiyama Station to Torotoko Kamioka, the 23-minute trip runs alongside the Katsura River on the old railway, which has long since been bypassed by a much more direct route through the mountains. Hikers can get off in intermediate stations to climb Mount Ogura, but we were just here to enjoy the ride. And the conductor at Saga Station is way too enthusiastic about her job. She is the true national treasure that you will find in Kyoto and should come and see.
Please stand on the room area near the door. 1号車から4号車、ご乗車のお客様、客車の窓ですが、窓は上についている銀色の部分2つ、こちらを当店のスパンで自動で上げたり下げたり調整することが可能でございます。各紙にてご調整いただきますようお願いいたします。Press with the order number 1, 2, 3, 4 can be opened and closed manually by pitching up the silver buttons with the front buttons.
At the end of the line, you take a short walk along the sweet potato fields to the mainline station to return back to Kyoto. I have no idea why the Sakano Railway has not been able to extend their line for a direct transfer at Yumahori Station. Maybe the local sweet potato roasters union complained about lost business if tourists did not have to make the walk on a surprisingly windy patch, even on what's otherwise been a pretty nice April day. At least there was a little bit of shelter on the platform. Once we were back in Osaka, it was well time for dinner, which was our opportunity to see Shinsekai, or the New World, a colourful district only the next street over from where we were staying, and it took us 2 days in Osaka to realise it was there. And this area is like a mini Dotonbori with plenty of colour, food and sake, and the landmark Sutenkaku Tower overlooking it all. And it was a nice way to end our time in Kansai, as tomorrow was a big travel day for our last leg of our 16 days in Japan. Somehow in all this is McDonald's. They could put a little bit more effort. I know they have a brand name to keep up, but you know, they're looking decidedly plain amongst, well, everything else here, you know? Like, what if they'd had a cashew fillet of fish? I mean, it is nice, but it's just brand. Yeah. But, you know, they need to do something to catch up to catch your own fillet of fish across the road.
Yeah, penguin.
Catch your own penguin?
The broken noses.
Maybe they're the penguins that fought back, so they got to stand outside.